Welcome to the Win Lose Tie podcast. We're trying out something here. I'm Jama
Yes, me.
7301, and with me here
I'm
is
ProfBytes.
ProfBytes. Tim, I'm Tony.
With you, more like you're with me.
Hey,
Yeah,
shush you. You
I'm the
you
one who
run
controls the channel.
you run the game shit. I'll run the podcast. Fine. Go be like that. That'll be my inclusion in the channel. This is probably gonna go out after our first video is up, so have fun watching us race Pokemon for a while we still figure out the roots of what the feel of the channel is going to be. So we're going to start off pretty simple today. This is going to be a really free-flowing conversation with not so much structure, but we're going to be talking about some tabletop RPG systems, ones that we've played, ones that we liked, things that we
And
like.
the new 5th edition.
Yeah, we'll touch briefly on it before, and as a bit of a spoiler, we do have a 5th edition podcast in the works where we break down some of the newer stuff. So, Tim, you want to start us off with one of your favorite games to play?
I think, I think one of my favorites, and I haven't played it a lot recently. I've played a couple of campaigns in it, and it's pretty fun. GURPS.
GURPS.
Oh, some of you may recognize it. Some of you may have played it. A lot of you probably haven't heard of it. It's GURPS It's an acronym that stands for Generic Universal Role Playing System, and you can play literally anything in it.
Yeah, it's a very from the bit. Correct me if I'm wrong. The bit you've sent me when I read the general rules, you can play it in any setting because the rules are
Yep.
so broad. The rules are basically you can throw it in any setting, and
Yep.
pretty much everything will work for it.
You can play as like dinosaurs back in the whatever Jurassic era or Cretaceous era, whatever era you want. You can play as cave people, you can play medieval fantasy, you can play steampunk, you can play cyberpunk,
Modern.
you can play modern, you can play Cthulhu games, you can play whatever you want.
Right.
And it works fairly well for pretty much anything. It has a couple issues, but
It seems, if I remember right,
the
it's
rules are
very
expansive.
it's also very complex
It is
to
complicated.
get your character started and on the ground running.
I've described it as so. Fourth edition of D&D is like algebra. It's really simple. 3.5 and Pathfinder are like trig. It's a bit complicated. You have to know what you're doing. GURPS is like Calc 3. You have to go in with some RPG experience and know exactly what you want to do, or else you will get lost in how many options there are.
Oh,
Um,
Jesus.
I
Like,
I've only played it once, I think, actually.
Is that the campaign where you had the really good sniper?
Yes, I was a Naga who could shoot, who could make pretty much any shot with his bow, and it was a compound bow in medieval times. It was fantastic.
Like, I think you
And
remember describing something to me once where in GURPS, it's possible for you to be more accurate shooting someone in the eye than it is to hit them in anywhere else, like in general.
it you can it's really weird when you do it like that though, and generally
Advised.
it's not worth the points that it takes to do that. But I did shoot a polar bear in the eye and kill it in one hit after the DM spent 30 minutes figuring out its stats. He was not particularly happy about that.
Let's
And then I took the polar bear back to town, cut off its head, and ate it whole.
Players tend to do that. They love to run right over their players or their DM stuff.
Well, he was coming up with that on the fly because I went hunting for polar bears. My character's the goal in life was to eat one of every animal.
Polar
He
bear was
was
on the menu.
Yeah, he was doing fairly well at it too.
Couldn't you have just reskinned brown bear stats?
Well, a lot of animals, their
Don't have
stats just
stats.
aren't in there.
Yeah.
The rules, while they're very expansive, a lot of the stuff hasn't been fleshed out, and so you have to do it yourself as the DM.
A lot of the
So-
rules seem like they're geared towards player characters, not.
No, the rules work for player characters and
No.
NPCs.
I mean, like
But
the rules are written like so much of the book is dedicated to the player character, not enemies and things
Well,
you'll
there's two
shoot.
books.
Oh, I thought there was a lot more GURPS books.
Well, there's two main books, but the second one is only needed by the GM, and that doesn't hold a lot of stats for monsters. You just use the first book to stat things up.
Okay, so it's not like a monster manual or anything like that.
No, there's no monster manual or anything like that. Although I'm sure there's plenty of online resources for stuff that other people have made already.
Right.
Um,
And I
Yeah.
guess you want to talk about GURPS?
they have an interesting magic system that I like, but I mean, we could probably do a whole podcast on different magic systems.
Well, we might have one on game. Well, no, this will just be. But I remember there was an ability that pretty much made you Batman,
Probably.
always prepared or whatever, or just in
Yes.
case. Where you
Um,
just 3 times a day you can pull a small mundane
It's a toolbox
object
thing, yeah.
out
You
of
could
your
just pull out
pocket
something.
that is that would be, as long as it would make sense for your character to even possess one of them, you can
Yep.
pull it out of your pocket or from under your seat 3 times a day if you're in a
Yep.
car.
Up to 3 times per day,
Yeah,
depending on how many points you put in.
It
So
makes-
actually, that's probably something very important that I don't think we've made clear. GURPS, everything is based on points. You
Yeah.
start out with a certain number of points to spend to build your character, and you can spend those on the 4 attributes. You can spend them on increasing your HP instead of essentially your con. You can spend points to increase more specific attributes at cheaper rates than the more general.
And skills.
There are
and-
also skills, and there's advantages, which can be pretty much anything, like having 2 heads or moving at a faster time rate than other people.
It's an ultimate point buy system from the sounds of it.
But there's also disadvantages you can take,
Do they give you more points to spend?
and they do give you more points. Typically, the number of disadvantages you can take are equal to half your starting point value, and you can get disadvantages from someone, say, cutting off your arm, and it permanently lowers your point value. You do not get compensated. GURPS is pretty hardcore like that.
Jesus.
It also takes a long time for you to get points.
Right.
Like, you might start with 150 points.
But once you burn those to make your characters, it's kind
Well, you
of...
still have those points in your character, but each session you'll only get like 6 to 12.
Right. So it's not quite as bad as like a Shadowrun where you're earning 3 XP, but then again, things probably cost more in GURPS, so it's balanced in its own
So-
way, I'm guessing.
Putting 1 rank in a skill costs 1. Putting 2 ranks costs 3 total, and then every rank after 2 costs 4 more points. So, I'm not sure how Shadowrun works, but
I was actually going to talk about that when we were done with GURPS, because that's my favorite role-playing system, partly because of its theme. But we can get to that when you feel like you're comfortable.
I think the one thing about GURPS that's a little weird, at least in my opinion, is it uses 3d6 for everything,
Right.
and rolling low is better than high.
That's a weird system. That seems counterintuitive from what most people would expect.
Yeah, it is a little weird. 18s are always critical failures, 17s are always failures,
You want to roll under...
always critical successes.
what is it? You want to roll under a threshold, if I remember right.
It's actually that number or less, but 17 always fails and 18 always critical fails.
Gotcha.
If you have less than 16, or if your target's less than 16, 17 also critical fails. Yeah. GURPS is actually really good at describing like how the difficulties of skills ramp up.
Right.
So, like, in the skills, it's describing driving and how the different difficulties are for driving. And so, a standard driving, which I think is like a 5 for difficulty, or a 0 modifier. So, like, you need to roll 5 or less if you have pretty much no skill in driving.
So each
It's
point...
just driving around without crashing.
Quick question. So does each point in a skill like raise the threshold by that number?
Yes.
So like if you had a 3 points in drive, it'd go from a 5 to an 8.
Yes.
Okay.
But, well, it's you get 3 ranks of drive,
Right.
which would be 7 points. But each skill also starts at a different threshold depending on how hard it is.
Right.
So easy starts at a threshold of your dexterity for driving. But if driving is very hard, it's like your dexterity -2 or something.
If you're doing goddamn stunt driving or getaway driving.
Well, no, this is dependent on the skill itself without any modifiers.
Right.
So, like, a hard check for driving might be driving in heavy rain. No, it was driving in snowfall in the example, and so that's a -5. And then really hard would be firing a gun while driving, which is -10. And then ridiculously hard is like firing a gun while driving a mountain pass, which is -15. And then firing a gun while driving a mountain pass during a snowstorm is a -20. You can do it if you put the skills points in, but it's going to cost you.
Wow.
Which is one reason why I like GURPS. You can do anything if you're willing to invest.
Right.
I mean, you can even invest points to be in a later technology time. So if you pay enough points, you can be from modern times in medieval fantasy. That doesn't mean you have modern gear.
It just means you have modern knowledges.
Yes, and you start with the amount of money that you would in modern times, and you get to start with modern gear.
Until people realize, hey, this paper money is bullshit. What is this?
I mean, you could spend that on starting with gold or something.
Yeah. Interesting.
But yeah, you can spend points for anything.
Shadowrun's not quite that free-flowing.
Well, no.
No. Of course, it's not designed to be. It's more of a controlled experience, you could say. It's not a D20 system. It uses just D6s for the entire game. It's a cyberpunk with magic environment or setting. So it's got that nice...
Most cyberpunk has magic anyway.
Well, but it's got really interesting lore in the way... Man, I cannot English right now. It's got an interesting backstory.
Yeah.
And
I really wish that I could play it at some point.
The way advancement works is you get karma, which is XP, and then you use that to buy upgrades. So you can upgrade at any point as long as you can afford the improvement. At creation, you get build points, which usually is about 400. You spend 200 of them, up to 200 of them, on your attributes, and the other 200 on skills, gear, and whatever else, like your spells and shit like that. With there being some restriction on what you can get access to at the start, because a newly turned Shadowrunner shouldn't be having access to a rocket launcher, let's say, or, incredibly powerful explosives, or a friggin' tripod-mounted chain gun.
It actually sounds somewhat similar to a space RPG I played once. Forget the name. Continue though.
But so all the gear has its own rating, like a number and a letter. It's either R, F, or nothing. R restricted, F forbidden. Basically, how street legal it is. And the characters play the role of a group of Shadowrunners, basically people who do deeds. They try to run between the cracks of the current society. In the world, the megacorps run shit, and they have their own borders within cities and countries. That is their territory, and they all have their own quote-unquote police force, which can include heavily armored SWAT troops and shit like that. So if you become big enough threat to them, they will roll out tanks after your ass.
Run away!
The reason why Shadowrunners can survive in a world that's full of like, oh, everything's connected via the Matrix, which is global internet Wi-Fi thing.
Hmm.
And everything's monitored. Like all the street corners have cameras, cameras everywhere and shit like that. RFID tags are the norm on objects, so they can know who belongs to what, or you
Who
can get
belongs to what?
like instead of, for example, street gangs, instead of
Yeah.
spray painting tags on the wall, will just plant RFID tags to show that it's their turf, and then it'll pop
Mhm.
up on other people's, like if
Oh,
they
there it
have
is.
on their
Okay.
comm links when they get in the near, like close enough to that signal. And then RFID tags can be in pretty much every goddamn thing to market either
Mhm.
as a set for, you know, security purposes and what have you. The runners work because they, once you cross, company lines, it's almost like you're crossing into a different country. And
Mhm.
your goal is, and because there's so much information being processed with all the videos, it's hard for them to get a full picture of what the hell is going on unless they really want to come after you. So a lot of the work that a Shadowrunner will undertake will be kidnapping, destruction, data extraction, assassination type jobs. And its magic system is interesting because you can overcast your spells
Mhm.
in order to deal more damage, or you can. You have two types of damage. There's physical damage and stun damage. If you when you cast a spell, you have to absorb the stun damage, otherwise you take the damage. But if you decide to overcast your spell, which is cast it at a stronger power level than what you normally can, you take physical damage because of the drain it takes on you. So it's a lot of guns, magic, rolling d6s. It's fun. It's a fun enough game because there's a lot of freedom, because there's no class types. There's archetypes that you can follow, or you can just completely free build your shit. Like hackers can be running around with katanas when they're not hacking shit, or use goddamn shotguns or assault
Mhm.
rifles or what have you. Or if you want to be a low profile character, you can use ceramic knives and stuff like that that won't be picked up on metal detectors. There's cybernetic limbs and things like
Mhm.
that. And then something ridiculous is I had a friend who was rolling 26 dice to shoot someone with a pistol. He was rolling even more when he used Edge, which is a special stat in Shadowrun that is basically your luck stat, you could say. And
So a lot of this actually sounds like a different system that I played once.
okay,
So it's a D percentile system, but it's called Eclipse Phase. It's a space sci-fi system,
right,
and you have a skill, or you have a stat that's just like, I think it's called like Moxie, which just is luck. And people have cybernetic bodies at this point, and most players will have a cybernetic body of some kind and backups, but you don't have to have them. And some bodies carry social stigmas, and
right,
it's a fairly
political
good
or
system.
right. Isn't that the free system? Like it's open source or whatever, or
It is. It's Creative Commons, actually. Now that I'm looking at it.
yeah, because that's the one that we were gonna play in Morris that Jay was trying to run.
Well, he did run a session of it.
Right, I wasn't there at the time though.
I played a kid, essentially.
Right,
I was like a 40-year-old or something in the body, or in a,
young person's body.
yeah, in a child robot body, because it allowed me to reach places that others couldn't. And I had a little robot snake that could repair things as well.
Let's see. So yeah, Shadowrun's a really interesting system. I've read a little bit of Eclipse Phase, but I never really got into it too far. But the Shadowrun Player's Handbook has, you know how all player handbooks have like fluff to break up the cold hard numbers
Yeah.
and stuff. So I really enjoy the fluff in Shadowrun. It tells like different running stories and stuff like that. a few big factors in Shadowrun are the contact system. Like there's literally a contact system. All your contacts have two stats, which is loyalty and connection. Loyalty is how willing are they going to be to do this task for you. Connection, how easily can they get you what you're looking for based on what type of contact they are.
If I can go back to GURPS for a second.
Yeah.
GURPS has advantages that are exactly that too.
Contacts?
Yes. And how willing they would be to do things for you, how effective they are.
Hell, World of Darkness has a contact merit that you can take. So it's a pretty common thing, but it's a very, I like it. I like it as a mechanic in pretty much every role-playing game because it's that outside character who can get you shit that you normally couldn't access.
I really appreciate the systems that have a lot of social skills that don't require your DM to have tons and tons of bookkeeping with your backstory.
Right.
And it also makes different backstories not completely unbalanced.
Right. Well, in Shadowrun, it makes sense to have a ton of contacts because, hello, you need to fence your stolen shit. And you need to be able to buy black market stuff that you can't normally get from street vendors. Like, in a game I was playing a few years ago, I was the only one in this group that had access to a black market dealer because I took a contact in just a general contact person, and he hooked me up with someone who got me grenades, which were forbidden to buy on the street, so it was hard to get a hold of them. Edge, what I was going to say. Normally in Shadowrun, when you roll your d6s, your six-sided dice, you get a success on a 5 or a 6.
Yeah.
When you use Edge, you add your entire Edge stat to your current roll, and 6s explode. So my friend...
Everyone's exploiting dice.
So which means that when you rolled a 6, you would count it as a success and then roll that die again in hopes of another success. So my friend, who was rolling normally like 26 dice, also had maxed Edge, which as a human is 7. He would add 7 dice to his pool and was rolling like 33 dice. He had an entire, those little tiny d6s that come stacked.
Yeah, I have a set like that.
He had one of those
he was using.
He was using one of those for Shadowrun.
I had to use all those dice at one point for my magic deck.
And he would get because of the exploding 6s on his Edge, he'd get 20 hits. Mind you, the average health for a person in Shadowrun is about 10 blocks of damage, of physical damage. The dude did not have enough body stat, which is like your constitution, or armor to soak up that damage. So he would wreck things when he used Edge. And he was a dual-wielding pistol user, so he could split up his dice pool to attack 2 separate targets.
Terrifying.
So he was rolling 15 and 17 with exploding 6s to just frag some dudes. Playing a hacker in Shadowrun, though, is you may not be great on combat, but in non-combat situations you can really thrive. And if you are in combat, there are still options to you as a hacker. You can hack cybernetic limbs if you're good enough. Or if you're in the city, you can maybe find someone's drone that's flying around and crash it into a sniper like I did. I found an unmanned toy. It was like a drone in the sky that some rich kid was flying around, and I crashed it into a guy who was trying to snipe at us while we were driving away. Because the game is silly. We've avoided talking about it, so should we just break down and go into D&D? Or is there another system you really like?
There was one other system I wanted to talk about along with D&D at least.
Is it Gamma World?
Yes, it is Gamma World.
Go ahead.
There are other systems I could talk about a little bit aside from D&D, All Flesh Must Be Eaten. It's a zombie game. I've played it a little bit. I think it used D20s. I don't remember all that much about it. I just remember I made prostitute zombies, and it was hilarious. It's a fun system, but I played fast and loose with the rules, so there wasn't a lot of following the rules on that.
Alright.
I mean,
So,
I might have followed the rules accidentally. I'm not sure. Are there any other systems that I can think about?
I
That
play World of Darkness, which is similar to Shadowrun, except it has, fewer skills than Shadowrun does.
I have
And it's
played.
vampires.
I have played vampires a little bit because
Fun
I
game.
had the whole um, RPG of the month that didn't last very long, but whatever. Oh, there's also Fuzzy Heroes, which it's a very interesting RPG system. I wouldn't say it's especially good, but if there are people out there listening to this that have kids that are like below the age of 6 or 7, it's a very good starting system because it's simple and there aren't really any rules that
That sounds.
children would need to remember.
And then there's always, the free-form games like Killer Breakfast and stuff. Which
Yeah,
is
that isn't
possibly.
really a system.
No, it's just a. Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever. Alright, so. Gamma World.
Gamma World. Well, Gamma World and the various D&Ds, because they're all related to a degree. So there's 3.5, which spawned Pathfinder in 4th edition. 4th edition spawned Gamma World in 5th edition. Although 3.5 is about as similar to 4th as 4th is to 5th. So that is to say they're not very similar. Aside from the stats that they have, pretty much. Yeah.
I haven't played Gamma World, so all I've got to go by is your stories of how crazy it can be.
Gamma World is very crazy. It's like 4th edition, except randomized and on steroids. I one of the party members had a horse, and he asked me if it was a purebred horse, and so I rolled D percentile to see how well bred it was, and I got 100. So I said yes, it is 100% bred.
And it
And
became
then
a horse made of bread.
someone later had a French toast horse.
God damn it.
It's Gamma World. That shit happens.
We're going with the puns already.
One of the players died trying to protect the French toast horse from a pack of radioactive birds. That literally
Okay,
happened.
I can't even be mad at that. I can't be mad anymore. Just
When
hearing that.
I played as a computer virus who hijacked a robot body, and I had a horse. Its name was Cookie, and I gave it the other robot body that was meant for a different PC.
What?
I'm a terrible person.
So you had a horse in a robot body.
Yes,
So
it was a cookie.
It just walked around and went nay.
Pretty much. Kind of funny. I think the body transformed into a horse, though.
Jesus Christ, Gamma World.
Gamma World is very crazy. It's very simple too, so it's a good thing to
Yeah,
start with.
I think it's boxed like a board game. It's like
It's
it's boxed like Castle Ravenloft or any of those, but it has all the rules. I think
It has
and
some
dice
types
included.
of cards. I think Wizards was trying to get money off of like a collectible card game thing for it to build a deck of mutations, and I honestly felt really meh about that. But the game itself is very fun.
Yeah.
You just have to have the right group of people.
You have to have people who are willing to do silly shit. Which reminds me, maybe we should
drank alcohol when I played it. So
maybe you should run Gamma World. I'd be willing to
it's
play that.
a much better game in person, though.
Because I suppose you can throw shit at each other when stupid things happen.
No, because it's a lot easier to make jokes in person.
Fair enough. All right. So now the big one, the biggest of the D&D. My experience, a little 3.5, some 4th edition, tiny bit of Pathfinder.
My experience is very, very small amount of a 3.5 Pathfinder, a lot of 4th edition. A lot of 4th edition.
And
4th edition.
there'll be a whole bunch of talk about the upcoming 5th edition on another podcast where we'll talk about comparing it.
About it a little bit here.
But first impressions of 5th edition are mixed, I would say.
My first impressions are decidedly meh.
Yeah. There are some things it does well, other things that it doesn't do well that we feel aren't quite right. But at least it addresses some of the problems that exist in previous editions,
It does, but
while creating all sorts of new ones, probably.
so here's my problem with probably my biggest problem with 5th edition. D&D is and always has been a power fantasy game. Like, sure, it's medieval fantasy, but you don't play it because you want to have super good non-combat experiences. You play it because you know D&D is going to have combat. If you play D&D and don't expect combat,
You're playing the wrong game.
I'm gonna say this: you're being retarded if you play D&D and expect there to not be combat. I mean, you can make a character who doesn't expect there to be combat, but that's completely different. And I've done that.
Pacifist?
Kind of. They're
There's-
not really a pacifist. They're just against killing.
In D&D,
Yeah,
it's
that's
hard to make a character who doesn't contribute much to combat, because it's a lot easier to do that in Shadowrun, because gathering information is really fucking important in
So-
that game, and you stay in one place.
In pretty much every edition of D&D, skills don't really do much.
Right.
They're really dependent on your DM.
Your
If you have
DM,
a good DM, you can have skills do a lot of work. If you don't, skills are going to be worthless.
right?
And then there's like, except for 4th edition, there's pretty much no way to gain experience from using skills by the rules. 4th edition has skill encounters, which I thought was a great addition to the game, but they took that out in 5th edition.
They
At
were
least
probably
from my
operating under the assumption that DMs can give XP for non-combat encounters, but some people like knowing.
But then there's the problem of, well, how difficult should this be, and how much experience should it
Right.
give out? But
There's no
it was
guideline.
pretty clearly defined in 4th edition.
And we've only seen a little bit of the Player's Handbook. We haven't seen the Dungeon Master's Guide yet, so there could be something in there. But we don't know for
I was
certain.
part of the playtest, and I didn't get the sense that any of that was in there. And I read through pretty much everything, but I might have missed it. I didn't get the sense that it was there, though.
But a quality DM, though, will cover that. And a quality DM is worth his weight in salt, because they're willing to do a lot of work to make your game enjoyment. So if you have a good DM, you might want to, thank them or get them a drink or something, because they can do a lot of work behind the scenes for
And
your games.
DMing is hard. It's time consuming. It's more often than not, people don't like DMs. Like, they might enjoy playing the games, but they'll argue and bitch at DMs constantly.
I think the biggest misconception is that a DM needs to foster the group's enjoyment. Because if you're a player out there and you've never DM'd, the goal of a DM is to set a story and a world for the people to engage in. And the more the people fight with and, butt heads with the DM, it makes it that much harder for them to do their job. And
Yeah, it's not the DM's job to make sure you have fun.
it's their
Everyone
job.
should be having fun,
It's-
including the DM.
It's their job to run their world. So if you do dumb shit and die, it's not the DM's fault.
It's the DM's job to make sure you know what your character should know, and to set up challenges that you should be able to overcome.
Sometimes the dice don't bounce your way. That's not their fault.
Sometimes they set up challenges for your character to literally run away.
But that's not in the common parlance of a lot of players. They don't
Oh.
run away.
So there have been a couple of times when I had a character literally run away because there was no way my character was gonna fight that, even when I knew my character would win. Just because my character wouldn't ever fight that. And there's one time when I had a monk who went toe to toe with a vampire to protect a cleric who could not run because they were on glass. The cleric literally could not move without falling over because of his heavy armor, and my monk stood between him and the vampire and punched the vampire until it ran away.
Yeah. So
It was very effective.
I like sometimes if you think about it, the DM is basically like the laws of the world. They're like physics, you could say. They're there to make sure that the world works and that the mechanics are all enforced and they give you the players something to do.
Yep.
And that's their job. And a lot of people find enjoyment out of, well, I shouldn't say a lot. There's a percentage of the players enjoy doing that.
Approximately 10% of people who play enjoy DMing. That might be a little high.
And there's different types of DMs out there, just like there's different types of players. It's just about, and that's what's really unfortunate, is if you don't get a DM whose style meshes with your style. That's kind of a big that's unfortunate, but it happens. And it's the biggest in D&D, you could say, because it's the most popular game out there.
And I'm sure some of you out there are wondering why we went on this tangent. Because this is D&D. D&D is the most popular. If you include Pathfinder.
When you say tabletop role-playing game, people think of D&D before they think of anything else.
So D&D is the most popular, but D&D, at least in my experience, is also the least rewarding for DMs. Because
it's a lot of work.
So you have to do all the combat stuff, which you have to do in most settings anyway. But all the skill rules are, in pretty much every edition of D&D, are poorly fleshed out.
Right.
So DMs are doing a lot for skills and a lot for character stuff. There are so many house rules people make for D&D.
To try to make their lives. If you see a DM with a lot of house rules, it's to make their life simple.
And because they've been playing the game a long time. It also could be to make it more balanced, because right. I play a good amount of Pathfinder now, and I have quite a few house rules that I run. Like, monks get full base attack bonus, and fighters get 4+ int mod skill points.
Because otherwise they're
Little
awful classes.
Balance. Well, fighter is good. It's just it doesn't make sense why it only has 2+ int mod skill points. The monk is awful.
Mad.
Yes, it's very mad. Multiple attribute dependent. You have to spread your points really thin for a monk.
And paladin in some games.
In 3.5, yeah.
I found a few things since we were talking about DMing, and on that tangent, in relations to a lot of games, I'm a type of DM who will plan big points, but I will improvise everything in between. Mm-hmm. Because I don't mind my players, because a lot of times they I want to go do this, so I can easily freeball something. I don't mind as much. Only when they start to do it all the time does it get annoying. And then I start to ramp up the difficulty the more they want to go off the path. But I'm also the type of person who will simplify skill checks, in a sense. If you want to do a specific set of actions, perfect example, I had a player in my 4th edition game. He climbed up on this, a tower on a wall, like a garrison, and he saw a guard that was just standing there watching the compound inside. He said, I want to kick this dude into, off the ledge. Instead of turning it into a whole combat encounter, I made him do an acrobatics check to balance running along the ledge, because that would have given him the best leverage or whatever to get him over the edge.
Yeah.
I made him make an attack roll, a single attack roll, and then another balance check so he didn't tumble over the edge too. The first acrobatics check was also part of a stealth check to make sure he didn't get heard when he was making his rush. So
sounds about right.
He succeeded the first two, so the dude was knocked off the edge, but he fell after him. I let him make one reaction check, just a straight up dex check. And he did. I didn't tell him what for.
Check.
Pretty much. An oh shit check with a dex mod. He succeeded. I had the threshold set in my mind because of he's fallen. And it was a DC 22 or something like that, and he got a 24.
Yeah. 4th edition's very clear about what DC should be, which is nice.
I usually estimate bit pace, but so he succeeded. What he did was he grabbed the guard and braced for impact against him. He still took damage. He took like half fall damage that he would have normally taken. But the other dude died, and he got away barely bloodied. So
Yeah,
that's the sort of thing I don't mind doing because it breaks up the monotony of how long combat can be.
yeah. That was one problem with fourth edition. So I ran a fourth edition campaign in Dark Sun. It lasted 3 years. After the first 3 months, I knew exactly what the plot of the rest of the campaign would be, and I followed that plot. I set it up in such a way that the characters intentionally chose the path that I wanted them to follow. They could have chosen a different path, and it would have annoyed me.
But that means you intrigue them enough with your story.
Well, at one point, I literally had the person who was like their commanding officer, essentially, tell them not to do something, and they went and did it because I knew they would. And yeah, I mean, part of the DM's job is you have to know your player characters. I mean, think about it. When you're a PC, you know your one character. That's all you have to know. When you're DM, you have to know all the players' characters and the NPCs
and the people playing those characters, because just because their character says,
Yeah.
"Oh, I'm a pacifist," well, their players still want to be engaged. So, or if I don't care about combat, but if their person playing the character does love combat, you gotta somehow keep them engaged, which is one of the harder parts. Especially if you have people who aren't story engaged or decision making or role playing engaged. It's really hard to keep those people engaged with the other people.
Yeah, it is.
I will say the shortfalls of my style of DMing, though, is that I don't come up with dungeons and stuff like that that might actually be fun to explore.
See, I have a hard time coming up with the itty bitty details that I know some of my PCs love. But on the other hand, I know one other DM who has a really hard time coming up with the world and story that I'm great at doing. And we've talked, like, if we co-ran a campaign, it'd be like the best campaign ever.
Right. Yeah. It's really easy for me to come up with broad strokes as well. Like, my campaign has this, and this in it. This happens at point X, this happens at point Y. How they fucking get to them, I'll figure it out as we go. But, alright, 4th edition.
Let's start with 3.5 and Pathfinder.
3.5 and Pathfinder.
We're going to talk about the specific editions in depth.
Just a little bit about each. 3.5, pretty much the bread and butter for most D&D players at some point in their life.
I despise 3.5 for so many reasons.
I know that was I know 3.5 was the edition that got a huge chunk of people into playing.
Yeah. So one of the there's really, it all boils down to one major problem for me. I can get past skills being mostly useless. I can get past weirdness in the rules, like getting four times however many skill points at level 1. I can get past investing half ranks in skills,
or just charging 2 ranks to
Yeah, I can get past that stuff. What I can't get past, though, at least in 3.5, and it's fixed a bit in Pathfinder, but we'll get there. The melee or the martial classes, if I'm going to use 4E's terms, so the classes who aren't casters, are just so much weaker than casters. Like, sure, a level 1 fighter can beat a level 1 wizard.
And he better because, 2 hit points on average.
Exactly. But by the time you hit, like, level 5, the wizard is on par with the fighter. And after that point, it's all downhill for the fighter.
Well, there's a trope for that. It's called Linear Warriors Quadratic Wizards. And it basically shows that
it
wizards...
pretty much came from 3.5.
Yep, wizards start out weaker, but they explode in power versus... even, like, the ranger spell list isn't very good.
Yeah, I mean, in 3.5, the monk was awful because it had 3/4 base attack bonus. The rogue was awful because it's so hard to get sneak attack. Fighters are awful because, well, they
You
get
hit things, and you hit things again,
they
and
hit
occasionally
things,
you trip
and
things.
they
Oh
don't
look, they
actually
don't.
hit things very hard in 3.5.
In yeah, your in damage in 3.5 was, if I remember right, for war fighters, even at higher levels, was 1d. Like if you had a D10 weapon, like a
Yeah,
broadsword, it was 1d10 plus your modifier, which might have been big. But compare that to a wizard who's doing a
then you have to like
fireball.
power attack, but yeah,
That's just getting rid of your
I'm
ability
not
to hit.
comparing it to Wizard. I'm just saying that like fighters don't hit nearly as hard as they do in Pathfinder or Fourth Edition.
Hell, in 4th edition, fighters are defenders, and their light attacks, at least, as a trade-off or something.
Um,
Their ability to
Barbarians
mark.
were okay. Paladins were mad, just like the monks, and because of that, they were kind of awful because they needed so many ability scores.
If I remember right, paladins need wisdom, intelligence,
Charisma,
charisma, strength,
Constitution.
and con.
They don't need int.
Yeah, I meant
They
to say
can't dump dex.
because armor class bonus.
Yeah. But in comparison, wizards and sorcerers were fantastic, and clerics and druids broke the game over their knee because they had the ability to polymorph. And when you polymorph in 3.5, you get that animal's stats or that creature's stats. So you can polymorph into. I don't know if you can actually polymorph into the Tarrasque, but you can polymorph into something that is huge and deals more damage by sneezing on something than the fighter can ever deal in a round.
Yeah, and fighters, because they got what? If they took a full round action, they can get about 4 attacks at their pitiful thing.
Yeah.
And then a wizard's like, hey, look, 6d10 damage coming your way, heads up. Oh, and it does this is to 5 targets, and it has a secondary effect. Okay, thanks.
I'm going to polymorph and get Threatening Reach as a gargantuan creature and do a breath attack that kills everything. And that's one of the less broken things wizards can do.
I think maybe a goal, what it was maybe to make fighters targets for buffs and shit like that to make them more dangerous, but it just never happened that way.
Oh, and then there's the Bard. The poor Bard.
I love the flavor of the Bard in every edition.
It has great flavor, but it's utterly worthless in 3.5. And then there's the races are horribly balanced. You either go for something that has a level adjustment because they're ridiculously broken, or you are a human because nothing else is good.
The reason is because humans get extra skill points and an extra feat at level 1.
Yep.
They get an extra skill point per level, I believe. And every other race had a positive attribute and a negative attribute. And some races had 2 negative attributes of the basic ones. I believe the level adjustment ones had such wildly amazing bonuses that the fact that they were level adjusted didn't even matter. Like,
Yeah.
it outweighed the penalty of level adjustment. So, like, if you're a level 5 character, if you're making a level 5 character, a lot of people would make an orc because that's, I think, level adjustment 4. So, like, a level 1, it would be treated like a level 1 something or whatever.
No, orcs are level adjustment 0.
Okay. Full orcs?
Full orcs.
Not okay.
Okay, so a bugbear is level adjustment 1.
Right.
Plus 4 strength, plus 2 dex, plus 2 con.
Holy
minus
shit.
2 charisma.
So a level 1 bugbear is the same as a level 2 PC, allegedly.
Yes.
So if you're
And
running,
you start with 3 racial hit dice. What the hell? You
So,
start
with
out
like twice
with
as much
3d8
HP
HP and a base attack of plus 2,
and bonuses to 3 stats. Yeah, that's broken.
all for 1 class level,
That's broken.
and
So-
plus 3 natural armor.
Holy balls.
Yeah.
And then they did away with level adjustment in 4th edition,
They did,
but they
which I thought was a great idea.
they made certain they just basically balanced a bunch of races into actual races. Like bugbears in 4th edition now get a strength and dex bonus.
Yeah.
Basically, bugbears are amazing rogues in 4th edition. because they can
hilarious.
use a weapon that's one size larger as a trade-off for losing all the fun stuff they had in 3.5. So
Yep.
you can use a broadsword, and if you take a feat as a rogue that lets you use heavy blades instead of just light blades with sneak attack, you can use a broadsword for D10 damage, or yeah, like D10 damage longsword or whatever instead of D8 for sneak attacks. You partner that with the ability that when you increase a weapon's size, you increase its damage die by 1.
Hmm.
So shuriken for are normally D4s. Rogues can use shurikens as D6s. Bugbear rogues can use a shuriken as a D8. They're throwing frigging tabletop saw blades.
uh, okay,
And-
so I want to read off the orcs since you suggested it.
Right.
Orcs have +4 strength in 3.5 and -2 to intelligence, wisdom, and charisma.
Okay. So that's a pretty shitty class.
And they have light sensitivity.
Okay, that's really bad.
Yeah, it's a really shitty race.
All right. I was thinking, was it ogre then? Maybe I can't remember.
Yeah, probably. Ogre was a level adjustment 1.
I was thinking something was level adjustment like 4.
No, ogres aren't level adjustment 1. They're level adjustment 2.
Oh, well, I can't. I'm
Level adjustment
misremembering.
4. Hill giant. Why not play a giant? You have +14 strength. +14 strength, +8 constitution, -2 dexterity, -4 intelligence, -4 charisma. And you're large.
Oh, natural armor.
+9 natural armor. And you have 2 slams as natural attacks. So you get a shit ton of attacks and really high stats.
Jesus. Yeah, 3.5 had a lot of idiosyncrasies that people loved. Like I have 2 words that just sums up how broken 3.5 is. Pun.
So I'm sure some of you out there are like, no one ever plays Pun Pun. And others of you out there are like, what the fuck is Pun Pun? Pun Pun is a kobold, which normally kobolds are the worst race. And this is true in Pathfinder as well. So I'm going to go on a tangent to the tangent for a second. Pun Puns are the only race in Pathfinder that start out as a CR 1/4 creature instead of CR 1/3. They are that bad.
Pun is an actual race in.
No,
Oh, kobolds.
kobolds. Sorry. So Pun Pun is a kobold with a viper familiar, and I think it's at like level 5 or 7 or
I
something.
thought it was level 3.
No, I don't. I think the level 3 was when you ignored some rules that were inconvenient. So Pun Pun has infinite stats. He can do literally anything. He can destroy the entire plane by blinking if he wanted. And he could summon Bahamut, the god of dragons, Bahamut.
Okay.
And then flick Bahamut to death with 1 hit, of course. And before Bahamut actually dies, make a diplomacy check to convince Bahamut to give over his deity powers to Pun Pun.
Alright. Here's the point of it. Because it's a level 5, it's a Divine Minion 1, Wizard 1, Master of Many Forms 3.
Yep.
I have the build up right now. And the point is there's Manipulate Form ability, or thing that kobolds get. They can use a touch ability. They can modify the form of any scaled one native to whatever plane, except for aquatic and undead creatures. So that means they can make something really, really big. Which is why he has a Viper familiar. The fast wild shape ability of the Divine Minion, which is what you take out level 1, lets you wild shape like an 11th level druid.
Yay, 11 levels of Druid for free.
You then wild shape into the Sarek and use the assume supernatural ability and to gain manipulate form. And then you bestow that same ability onto your Viper, which you get at level 2. So both you and the Viper can transfer abilities back and forth. The way it works is he grants himself the giant size spell like ability at will. He casts it on his familiar through share spells, which is from the wizard, to increase the Viper to colossal, which gives
it's a plus 32 size bonus to strength.
This means his strength score went from 4 to 36. Using manipulate score, the Viper then increases Pun Pun's strength score permanently up to the Viper's maximum strength score
of 36.
This is
a permanent increase.
This is not a size bonus. It's a permanent increase through manipulate form. It's not a bonus.
Yep. And then you can dismiss the spell on your familiar. It goes back down to tiny. Use giant size on yourself, and then you have strength of 68. Manipulate form to increase the Viper's strength to that. And then dismiss giant size on yourself, and now you have
36.
A Viper with a 68 strength, and you have 36 strength, and you can repeat the process
ad
forever.
infinitum.
And then there are other shenanigans you can do to use your strength score in place of other things. And
we'll just assume Pun decides to have a strength score of 20,010 for a modifier of 10,000. Now Pun gets his other scores to the same ridiculous height.
I'm going to say that we should not rant about Pun.
This is just an example of what 3.5 allows.
3.5 is broken because of a lot of reasons. One of the reasons is because of when you're a warrior quadratic wizard.
There's also
another is because there's just so much material for 3.5.
And
I was once thrown into a 3.5 game with just a shitload of PDFs given to me, and I was told to make a 5th level character.
Yeah, there is a lot of manuals.
What the fuck?
Like, if you stick to the core materials, it's not bad, but as soon as you start adding in pages of extra feats and pages of extra class, like dozens of extra classes.
Player's handbooks, you'll probably be fine.
Yeah, just the core is more than enough for a lot of people. The one book I will recommend, though, for 3.5 is the Book of the Sword Ghost, or whatever. Book of the Nine Swords. I can't remember what it's called. But it offers...
It's the one that gives powers to...
fighters.
Yeah.
And adds a few new...
So it's essentially 4th edition in 3.5.
Right.
Because it gives them powers.
It gives them stances and things like that. That let them do whirlwind attacks and shit like that. But it also adds, like, one of my personal things that I love in games is, like, socket items. Like gems you can socket into weapons for specific effects. I just like that little bit of customization you can do.
Actually, that's one other thing about 3.5 and also Pathfinder that I find annoying. Magic items are... like, magic weapons and armor are kind of awful. Because you always want the highest bonus you can get. And anything else for flavor just is gonna hurt you. And you pretty much have to have a Cloak of Resistance, and you have to have a belt if you rely on any physical ability score, and a headband if you rely on any mental ability score. So there's 3 of your slots, plus armor, plus...
But how much of the magic items are allowed for, different unique abilities? Because I know 4th edition has a ton of magic items that all do different shit in, like, their gear.
Yeah, so 4th edition changed it. You can have a +1 magic item, or you can have a +1 flaming sword or whatever, and those are all about the same cost.
Right. Because adding a keyword in 3. Isn't 3.5 like expensive to add a keyword?
Yeah. It costs enhancement bonus to add keywords.
So adding one keyword is the same as adding an entire +1.
Mm-hmm. Depending on the keyword, some are more expensive.
So you could add, like, fire, or you could have a +1 flaming sword, or a +2 magic weapon.
Yeah. And there's really no contest. You want the +2 magic weapon.
The flaming doesn't really add anything. In 4th edition, a flaming weapon has some value.
It's a +1 flaming longbow or whatever is probably a couple thousand GP more expensive than a +1 magic longbow. It depends, though.
Yeah.
But
in most cases, it's not...
It's not... It is it's not in most cases. It is not worth. It's not as much as a +2 item.
Right.
It just isn't.
Yeah. That fourth edition seems to have some really good. A lot of people. I should look up before I start making generalizations because this one I don't know for sure, but I'm pretty sure some people complained about not being able to have 6 keywords on their magic weapon or something.
I'm sure someone has. Me and my other DM friend, we both agree that how 4th edition handles magic items is vastly superior to 3.5's.
Well, yeah, you can have a variety of weapons instead of
And
just.
this applies to Pathfinder as well.
Does Pathfinder do the same thing?
Yep.
Very nice.
No, Pathfinder does the same thing as 3.5.
Oh. Yeah, sure, it's cool to have a weapon that's a mouthful, but when you're actively sacrificing utility,
Yeah.
like, oh boy, I can do this, or instead I can have one keyword
I
and.
can have a +5 sword, or I can have a +1 flaming, shocking, something sword.
Well, the utility may be nice, or it's neat, but it feels like the penalty is too steep for having a keyword. Whereas in 4th edition, you can be like, well, I can have a +1 magic weapon, or a
And have some money.
or have a
Or-
+1, shocking weapon,
Yeah.
which deals extra damage on crits. Well, sign me up for that.
So I think 3.5. I think we've talked about enough.
Yeah.
Pathfinder is essentially 3.5, but there are quite a few fixes to it.
Some of the bullshit.
It still has the
taken
same
out.
problems with magic items and skills, although the bullshit with skills is a little less because some skills are rolled into one. Some classes get more skill points, but not the fighter for whatever reason.
Fighter is like the most hated class by wizards.
No, the monk is the most hated class. The monk is an awful class in Pathfinder. So is the ranger, or not ranger, rogue. The ranger, paladin, barbarian, and fighter all got substantial buffs, and the cleric, druid. Oh, the bard got so many buffs
And
too.
the druid got nerfed.
The druid and cleric got hit with nerf sticks really hard, mainly because polymorph was changed. Polymorph no longer gives you the stats of whatever you're polymorphing into. And it doesn't give you their special abilities anymore either, so you can't break the game.
Hooray!
Fighters were buffed. I think they got more feats, and they got special abilities now. Barbarians were made into an anti-mage monster. Very effectively, too, because of the superstitious rage power.
So wait, that means they don't take as much spell damage or something when they're
So
raging?
the superstitious rage power gives them a bonus on saves against spells and spells-like abilities while they're raging.
Oh, that's neat.
It's like +2, plus 1/3 your level or something.
That's actually a really cool counterplay measure.
And humans can take a favored class bonus, and that's another good change from 3.5. Humans can take favored class to increase that. So 3.5 multi-classing was really common because there was pretty much no penalty to it.
Yeah,
And-
an XP penalty that how many DMs enforced.
Well, there was the XP penalty, but you got to ignore a certain class or set of classes.
Right. Your 2 classes had to be within 1 level of each other or something.
Unless one of them was
A favored
specific
class.
one for your race.
Right.
But in Pathfinder, at level 1, you choose a favored class, and whenever you take a level in that class, you get either +1 HP or +1 skill point, or there might be some racial benefit for that specific class. Like humans can increase the bonus of superstitious rage power by, I think, 1/4.
Their level?
No, just 1/4
Oh.
every time you take it. So
All
every
right.
4 levels, it's an additional +1. But that's such a good bonus. And I know human sorcerers get an additional spell known of a level of any spell level that is not the highest level they can cast. So at level 1, you can get an additional cantrip as a sorcerer, which you can cast that all you want for free.
Neat.
Prestige classes pretty much are dead in Pathfinder because
Oh god, those were nightmares.
there's no real reason to multi-class anymore. And they were awful in 3.5 because it was just so broken. If you could get a certain prestige class or set of prestige classes,
The synergy among some of them was way too good.
yeah.
Oh, and the limitations for some was just seemed really low too. Like the requirements.
So we talked about how barbarian change, bard, cleric, druid, fighter. The monk still doesn't have full base attack bonus in Pathfinder. Instead, it gets flurry of blows when it takes a full attack action. It acts like it has full base attack bonus, and you get additional attacks like your 2-weapon fighting, which I just find bizarre why they would do that.
Like I can see what the thought
But
process.
then you also get to use your monk level, so essentially you get full base attack bonus on combat maneuvers, and that was another thing changed from 3.5. They made combat maneuvers much easier to deal with.
Like I can understand maybe what they were thinking of when they didn't give Monk full attack bonus, because they're like, well, this thing has utility with its key powers, but the key powers don't offer that much utility. They offer.
One of the main problems I have with the the monk is just that so many of its powers don't mesh well. Like, sure, you get increased speed, but you can't flurry of blows if you're running, and you can teleport if you spend enough key to do it. But it also ends your turn, so you can't teleport in the middle of flurry or anything like that. And you get some defensive buffs, which are kind of nice, I guess. And then the worst of it is, so from what I know, Pathfinder was essentially written by 3 people. One worked on the combat system. One worked on the PC side of the combat system, so the classes. One worked on skills, and one worked on monsters. But they didn't really talk to each other. So skills are useless in combat still. And then the PCs have abilities that some monsters have, but they don't work like you think they should, or how any reasonable person would think they should. So you have spell resistance as a monk, but spell resistance in Pathfinder is if any spell, not
even
enemy spells,
even friendly
any
like
spell.
heals.
And it takes a standard action to lower it, and a standard action to keep it lowered. So if you fall unconscious, by the rules, you cannot lower your spell resistance. And so the cleric might not be able to heal you while you bleed to death.
That does seem like a pretty major oversight.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
Because that could easily just be appended by saying, willing sources aren't privy to this whole thing,
Yeah.
or whatever. But if it's just universal like that, I don't.
Monk just has a bunch of
Unsynergizing abilities.
Yeah.
Like
And it has some nice abilities like Stunning Fist, but Stunning Fist is only nice because you get it for free.
it has.
Like, if you had to take a feat for Stunning Fist as a monk, I would never do it. Because you first have to declare you're using it, and then you have to make the attack roll, and then they get to make a save.
Yeah, it only really gains utility after tons of levels when you can add different effects to it.
Yeah.
And by that point, well, fuck. It's not even. It's
Still not right.
it's too many. I'm trying to think of the idiom here. It's just too many eggs in the basket, you could say. It's trying to do too many things at once. It's trying to be a crowd control. It's trying to be a damage dealer. It's trying to be a tank with that huge armor class boost that it can get. And
It's none of them, though.
it
It has a smaller hit die than the fighter, so it's on par with the rogue. It has no way to wear armor, and it needs more ability scores than any other class, including the paladin.
I mean, yeah, you can do crazy shit with it if the stars align, but just for standard
I've
use.
seen a point by monk that did not have both 7 intelligence and 7 charisma. Just because you need those points. I think the monk I made when I played a monk, and keep in mind, this was under heavy home brew or house rules that made the monk significantly better, and also playing a homebrewed race that the DM made, which also really helped the monk. I had, I think, 16 strength, 16 wisdom, 14 dex, and 14 con. Something like that. And I had 7 int and 7 charisma.
After that much modding.
That was before racial bonuses, though.
See ya.
So,
Well, the bottom line is, well, nothing we say is going to change anybody's minds out there about what they're going to play or what they like. But
the
this
monk
is just
did not get helped in Pathfinder. The rogue got some help, but not a lot. Because the rogue still has trouble with getting sneak attack. Less trouble now. But you still have to rely on a party that's competent.
right.
And ranged rogues are worthless.
At least in the new edition, there's a way, as long as any of your, at 5th edition, if an ally has advantage on a target, you can get sneak attack on it.
Yeah.
So that'll make ranged rogues at least something.
Yeah. So 4th edition actually really helped. They simplified a lot of the combat buffs to just be combat advantage. And then if rogues had combat advantage, they got sneak attack, which is really good for rogues.
Sneak attack, all the
They
things.
buffed monks, but monks now can use powers that allow them to both move and attack. But 4th edition was really good about powers. So a lot of people complain about 4th edition.
The biggest complaint was that it turned it too much MMO-ish and forced you to use a grid, which is a D&D game based off miniatures, you know. Or even originally.
I've never seen a D&D campaign that didn't use a grid. Ever.
Yeah, and I was reading that one changelog thread. There was people complaining about the grid, so about how 4th edition required them to use a grid, and
People complain about anything.
it turned the combat into MMO slog, and it blah blah blah.
4th edition did have a problem with combat taking forever after level 10 or so. I did figure out a way around that, but it requires you to increase enemies' damage output and decrease their health.
As a trader, yeah, the enemies have
Yeah.
a shit ton of health once you hit level 11.
So do PCs. That's why you
Right. Spike the damage.
I think at level 11 you decrease their HP by like 25% and increase their damage by 20%. And then at level 21 you decrease their HP by 50% and increase their damage by 50%. And that works out a little bit towards the PCs, but it's fine.
Right. But yeah, 4th edition made a lot of the classes more viable, balanced things out, made it.
4th edition was way focused on combat, though. There were some nice things like rituals, but they were definitely not combat, and because of that, they didn't see a lot of use.
Right. The biggest complaint, another complaint about 4th edition, skills got trimmed down. They trimmed the fat on skills, and that there was
Which I thought was good.
no explicit rules for role playing, I guess, which some people complained that 4th edition stifled role playing.
That is a lie.
I
I played Crazy Wizard.
I don't mind
Remember
4th
that
edition
guy?
though. 4th edition's a pretty fun edition. It's really easy to get people into it. Because once they know how a few abilities work, they can piece together how everything else works.
Yeah. 4th edition is definitely new player friendly, especially if you start at low levels.
Right.
Because you don't need to know much going in, and everything is pretty self-explanatory.
Hell, they make power
You don't
cards
have
that.
to worry about how things interact.
Right. Any closing thoughts on this? On these games, Dim?
5th edition, I don't like it. So 5th edition goes back a bit to the linear wizard quadratic, or linear warrior quadratic wizard.
At first glance.
Well, it essentially is static warrior linear wizard.
Yeah.
And
they tried to rectify it by giving fighters more attacks, but they already did that in previous editions. So
Yeah, fighters get 4 attacks per round at level 20. Monks only get 2 unless they, or only get 3 unless they spend ki to do so, to get attacks, which I can't understand why fighters get to attack faster than a monk.
again, it's that whole monks given versatility against, and fighters aren't. So might as well give fighters more attacks. That's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah, just,
So, 5th edition looking like more of the same from 3rd with a few improvements.
few improvements and a lot less power.
Yeah, the power curve is smoothed out a lot, stomped a little flatter. Um, yeah, if you play mainly D&D, though, like 3.5 D20 models, I recommend just trying to find other D20 systems out there to slowly get into different themes and stuff.
I would
And-
pass.
Well, I was saying if you want to play like Star
I know,
Wars
I know.
D20 or D20 Modern.
Oh, actually, that reminds me. I at Convergence, not this year, but last year, I played a little bit of the Star Wars role-playing game that Fantasy Flight made.
Right?
That is a really simple system. It was pretty fun. I would suggest looking at that too.
Yeah. And
Pick that up.
hell, if you guys feel like, in the comments below, talk to us about some of your favorite gaming stories, your favorite stories from when you've been playing. Talk about your favorite systems. Feel like yelling at us? Go ahead. I don't know
Yell at him.
if either of us will
Or did I
reply.
gesture with my thumb?
Yeah, I don't know if
Good thumb.
But this was our first podcast, so thanks for listening in, and we'll see you next time.
Later, folks.